Igor was a young and determined man who worked as a waiter in one of the city's finest restaurants. Known for his friendly demeanor and sharp sense of responsibility, Igor had quickly become a favorite among regular customers. But tonight, a quiet evening at work was about to turn into something he could never have imagined. The restaurant was bustling with a lively hum of conversations, clinking glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. Among the crowd sat an elderly couple, Galina and her husband, who had just arrived and settled into their table near the window. Galina, with her gentle smile and warm presence, instantly caught Igor's attention. As he served them their meal, he couldn't help but notice the kindness in her eyes. Moments later, while clearing a nearby table, Igor's ear caught an alarming sound, a sudden cough that turned into choking. His eyes darted to Galina, who was struggling to breathe, her hands clutching her throat in distress. A wave of panic rippled through the restaurant as people froze, unsure of what to do. Without a second's hesitation, Igor sprang into action. He rushed to Galina, his heart racing, and gently but firmly took charge of the situation. "Please stay calm," he said to the guests nearby, trying to manage the growing tension. With quick, precise movements, Igor applied first-aid techniques he had learned years ago. Every second felt like an eternity as he worked to help her. Finally, a gasp of relief filled the air as Galina began to breathe again, her face slowly regaining color. Before Igor could fully process what had just happened, another figure entered the scene. Pavel, the restaurant's strict and intimidating manager, stormed into the room. His eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto Igor. "What do you think you're doing, Igor?" Pavel's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You abandoned your duties for this chaos? This is a restaurant, not a hospital." The room fell silent. Igor, still kneeling beside Galina, looked up in disbelief. How could someone care more about maintaining appearances than saving a life? The elderly woman's husband, who had been in shock moments ago, now stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Igor felt the weight of the manager's anger, but before he could defend himself, Galina's husband spoke. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. "I've been watching everything very closely," he said, his gaze shifting between Pavel and Igor. The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Galina's husband, a tall man with a commanding presence, stood with his hands clasped in front of him, staring directly at Pavel. His tone was calm, but there was an edge to his words that hinted at something deeper. "Igor saved my wife's life," he began, his voice firm yet measured, and while everyone else stood frozen, he acted without hesitation. "But you care more about rules than human decency." Igor's heart was pounding, his thoughts racing. He glanced at Galina, who was still recovering, her frail hand clutching a glass of water. The gratitude in her eyes was unmistakable, but Igor could feel Pavel's disapproving glare burning into him. He felt torn, unsure of what would come next. Was his job really at risk for doing what he thought was right? Pavel's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "With all due respect, sir, this is a place of business," Pavel argued, his voice tinged with frustration. "Our reputation depends on professionalism, not reckless heroics." Igor abandoned his post. Abandoned his post. Galina's husband interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Let me make something clear, Pavel. This reckless hero just saved my wife's life. A life that means more to me than any so-called reputation." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Guests exchanged glances, whispering in hushed tones. It was clear that Galina's husband wasn't just another patron. There was something about the way he carried himself, something that commanded respect. Igor couldn't help but wonder, who exactly was this man? Galina reached for her husband's hand, her voice trembling but steady. "Enough, my dear," she said softly. "Igor did what any good person would do. Let's not make this harder for him." Her words carried a warmth that eased some of Igor's anxiety, but the tension in the air was far from gone. Pavel opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the man turned his piercing gaze back to him. "Do you even know who I am?" he asked, his voice dropping to a lower, more menacing tone. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Igor's mind raced. He had never seen this man before, but there was something familiar about him. A strange mix of fear and curiosity stirred within him. Pavel, on the other hand, seemed caught off guard. His confident demeanor wavered as he struggled to respond. I don't see how that's relevant," Pavel stammered, his usual composure crumbling. "Oh, it's relevant," the man said, stepping closer. "Very relevant. Because I'm not just any customer, Pavel. I'm the owner of this restaurant." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Igor's eyes widened in shock, and even Pavel looked as though the ground had shifted beneath him. "You're the owner?" Pavel repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Indeed I am," the man confirmed, his tone as cold as ice. "And right now, I'm questioning why I ever trusted someone like you to manage my business." Igor stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do. His heart raced as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. What would happen next? Would this unexpected turn of events save him, or would it only complicate things further? Igor felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The revelation that Galina's husband was the owner of the restaurant hit him harder than he expected. All the pieces were falling into place. The man's commanding presence, the way he had spoken with authority, and his unflinching defense of Igor's actions. But this new information didn't ease Igor's growing anxiety. If anything, it made the situation even more unpredictable. Pavel's face had turned pale. He fidgeted uncomfortably, trying to regain his composure. "Sir, I assure you, my intentions were only to maintain order," Pavel said, his voice trembling slightly. "I didn't mean to undermine the gravity of what happened." The owner's gaze remained fixed on Pavel, cold and unrelenting. "Order," he repeated, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You call berating a man for saving a life maintaining order? Do you even hear yourself?" Igor stood silently, his thoughts swirling. He didn't know what to say or how to act. Was it better to stay quiet and let this unfold, or should he speak up? He glanced at Galina, who gave him a reassuring nod, as if encouraging him to stay calm. But the tension in the room was palpable. Other staff members lingered near the edges of the dining area, watching the unfolding drama with wide eyes. The diners, too, had stopped eating, their attention fully captured by the confrontation. It was as if time had slowed, and every word, every glance, carried immense weight. The owner turned back to Igor, his expression softening slightly. "Tell me something, Igor," he said, his voice steady. "Why did you step in? You must have known it could get you in trouble." Igor swallowed hard, his throat dry. I couldn't just stand there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She needed help, and I knew I could do something. I didn't think about the consequences." The owner studied him for a moment, his sharp eyes searching for something. Finally, he gave a small nod, as if he had found what he was looking for. "That," he said, "is exactly the kind of instinct I value. Caring for people, even when it's inconvenient." Pavel's frustration boiled over. "Sir, with all due respect, rules exist for a reason. If we allow staff to act impulsively, where does it end? The restaurant's reputation." "Reputation," the owner snapped, cutting him off. A reputation built on cold indifference means nothing. This place stands for quality, yes, but also humanity. If we forget that, we lose everything. Pavel opened his mouth to argue, but the owner raised a hand to silence him. Enough, he said firmly. We'll address your concerns later. For now, step aside. Igor's pulse quickened as Pavel reluctantly moved back. The owner's words gave him a flicker of hope, but the situation was far from resolved. Questions swirled in his mind. Would Pavel face consequences? And what did this all mean for him? Igor's palms felt clammy as the tension in the room continued to mount. He could see the unease in Pavel's stance, the way his hands clenched and unclenched as if he were grasping for control over a situation that had spiraled beyond his reach. The owner, however, remained calm, his piercing gaze shifting between Pavel and the other staff members who were now silently watching from the sidelines. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone, and Igor couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was about to unfold. He glanced around the room, catching snippets of whispered conversations from the diners. Some murmured about Igor's bravery, others speculated on Pavel's future, but all eyes were on the owner, waiting for his next move. "Igor," the owner said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was steady, but there was a fire in his tone that made everyone listen. "Do you know why I value employees like you?" Igor shook his head, unsure of how to respond. "No, sir," he replied quietly. "It's because you remind me of myself," the owner continued, his voice growing stronger. "When I started this restaurant, I didn't have much. Just a small space, a handful of recipes, and a dream. But what made this place succeed wasn't just the food or the decor. It was how we treated people, customers and staff alike. Without compassion, without heart, this restaurant is just another building." The words hung in the air, their weight sinking into Igor's mind. But they seemed to have a different effect on Pavel. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to find an opening to counter the owner's argument. "With all due respect, sir," Pavel said, his voice laced with defiance, "business is about structure and discipline. If we let emotions dictate our actions, we risk chaos. What Igor did may seem noble, but it was a breach of protocol." "Protocol?" The owner's voice rose, sharp and cutting. "Is that all you see here? A set of rules?" Lives were at stake, Pavel. Real lives, not numbers on a ledger or tables in a schedule. And yet you chose to prioritize your so-called protocol over humanity. That's not discipline. That's neglect. Igor's chest tightened as he watched the heated exchange. He felt a strange mix of emotions, gratitude for the owner's defense, fear for what might happen next, and a lingering doubt about whether he truly deserved this level of support. Pavel took a deep breath, his face now red with frustration. "Sir, you're letting emotions cloud your judgment," he argued, his voice strained. "Running a successful restaurant requires tough decisions. If we allow this kind of behavior, it sets a dangerous precedent." The owner stepped closer, his expression icy. "The only dangerous precedent here is tolerating leaders who lack empathy," he said coldly. "And I've had enough of it." A hushed gasp rippled through the crowd. Igor's heartbeat thundered in his ears as the owner turned toward him. "Igor," he said, his voice softening, "you've proven something important today. But there's still one final decision to make." Igor's breath hitched. What decision? The weight of the moment was unbearable, and every second felt like an eternity as he waited for the owner to speak again.